All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Introduction to Fisheries Management webinar. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Janine Higgins, and I'll be the facilitator for this evening. So I'm a Education and Engagement Specialist with Alberta Environment and Parks. And I also have Rob Harris here, who's supporting me for the question and answer and some of the technical aspects of this evening. So while we normally host these sessions in person, we are very glad to have technology to support us and allow us to still gather online during these unprecedented times. Today's meeting is going to be recorded, and the recording will be posted to our engagement webpage tomorrow. So to start off, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that I am joining this evening from Edmonton in Treaty 6 territory, and I acknowledge the many First Nations and Métis whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. I honor and respect the elders of past, present, and future. And I ask that since we are dispersed across Alberta this evening, that each one of us personally acknowledges the Indigenous people of our region. So, again, I'd like to formally welcome everybody for this evening. Our agenda for this evening is to go through some of our sort of background information in terms of how the webinar will work for tonight. And then I'll be passing it off to Dr. Stephen Spencer, who is our lead presenter and is going to take us through a webinar on introductions to fisheries management. So really, we're here this evening to talk all about fisheries management and everything that comes with it. So of course, we'll then move into our question and answer section of the evening. We've got about an hour to answer as many questions as we can this evening before we close at 8:30. So in terms of how the question and answer will work for this evening, thank you very much to everybody who submitted questions when they registered for Zoom. We will be starting our evening by answering 3 of our common questions that came in through that tool before we move into the live Q&A for tonight. So in order to use the Q&A tool, we are going to get you to open up this bar at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to see the Q&A tool down there. And that's where we will be able to accept your questions for this evening. So we do have a lot of folks who are joining us tonight, which is really exciting to have so many people here. But how we're going to be going through your questions is once you type them in to the white box that will pop up, is that we're going to be sorting them in terms of how we're answering them. And so tonight, we're actually going to get you to vote on which questions you would like to have answered. So in order to do this, there's something called upvoting. So you'll be able to actually upvote other people's questions based on the things that you would like to hear about this evening. So we are going to try and answer a broad diversity of questions on fisheries management. And we'd ask that if you have very specific water body related questions, that you save those until our regional webinars next week, or you submit them through our Q&A tool that we are using online on the engagement page. So in terms of what can go into the Q&A tool this evening, we are asking, of course, that you keep it clean. So anything that goes into that Q&A tool, folks will be able to see and read. So any inappropriate questions with profanity or that are inappropriate in nature will be deleted. If we start to get a bunch of questions that are coming in that have already been responded to, we're going to dismiss those questions. So again, we're trying to answer a broad diversity of questions this evening, all related to fisheries management. So if we don't get to your question this evening, don't worry, there's still lots of opportunity to interact with our experts. We are going to send or ask people to send their questions in to our Ask the Expert tool that we have on our engagement webpage. So there's lots of great resources on there, one of which is the Ask the Expert tool. So on that tool itself, you'll actually be able to see other people's questions that have been submitted. So you can check and see if the question that you have has already been answered once, or you can submit your own question and we will get back to you. So in terms of who's going to be responding to all of your great questions that you have for us this evening, we've got a whole series of folks who are here tonight to support this event. So as I mentioned, Dr. Stephen Spencer, who's one of our senior fisheries biologists, is going to be going through our presentation this evening, and then he will be joining our panel that we have here. So for this evening, we've got Dave Park, who's a director of Fish and Wildlife Policy, Katon Wilcox, Jordan Walker, Stuart Nadeau, who are all fisheries managers. We've also got Miles Brown, who is another senior fisheries biologist, as well as Craig Copeland, who is our fish culture manager. So last but not least, we have Bill Patterson, who is our Provincial Fish Allocation and Use Specialist, and Matt Besko, who's our Director of Wildlife Health and Licensing. So we've got lots of folks who are going to be here to be able to answer your questions as we move into that section of our evening. But with that, I would like to pass it off to Stephen Spencer, who is going to be our lead presenter for this evening. So Stephen, I will pass it off to you to take us through our presentation.
Well, thank you, Janine, and welcome everyone. I'm super happy to see so many folks were able to join us this evening. Typically this time of year, we are going all over the province, holding meetings, trying to get information from you, and your information is very important to us. So really glad to have everyone here. It was quite a fishing year this year. I was out lots talking to people fishing, so we may have met on the lake or at a boat launch, and saw a lot of fishing this year out at Lac St. Anne, just to the west of Edmonton. We did a study, and we found that there was 3 times the amount of fishing that we ever recorded before, so it was a big year. So my role tonight is to talk about the fisheries management process here in Alberta. So fishery is the use of fish, and management is how we keep them going, and it's all about supply and demand. So just a quick overview. I seem to be locked up, which is wonderful.
You might just have to click on your screen again to take control, Stephen. There we go.
Okay. So yeah, just a quick overview. Alberta offers some wonderful fishing opportunities, from our high mountain streams with beautiful trout species to the really neat fish we find in our prairie rivers and streams like lake sturgeon and sauger and quillback, to the lake fisheries we have. We have a diverse fishery here, which is really nice, and we have a lot of people that enjoy them. We have a lot of people out fishing, which makes for interesting and challenging situations sometimes. So how do we provide sustainable opportunities? And sustainable, I mean, how can we ensure that there's going to be fish for our kids and our grandkids? Well, first of all, one thing that we recognize is that not all uses are equal. Alberta's priorities are set out in government policy and legislation and in law decisions. Our first priority is conservation. We need to make sure that there's enough fish to maintain the populations, enough adults to have kids, and enough kids to make adults. Our second use of the fish is for our Indigenous people, for their cultural and food needs. We have a recreational fishery, and then the economic use. And this is all covered in more detail in our fish conservation strategy, which you can find online if you Google those terms. So this is our fish management cycle. And so starting from the top, it's very important that we get assessments of the fish populations. So that's, what species are in a lake or a river? Are there good numbers? Are we seeing good numbers of kids coming out? That sort of thing. So from that, we can roll that into a status, which tells us how well the fishery is going. And this information we bring forward to engagements like this one right here. And so what we really need from you, the public, are our management objectives. And so what do you want from this water body? And from there, we get regulations, and then the fish cycle continues. We do assessments on how the regulations are faring and so on. So the assessments, that starts with good information, understanding our fish communities, and we need good information. It can't be just our last fishing trip or our gut feelings. We need really good information. So we use standardized methods that are used across North America to determine status. It gives us information on all species. And then we also need information from you. So this summer you might have seen me out on one of the lakes that I was working on, collecting information on how much fishing was going on, and then we were doing surveys as well. From that information, this gives us we need to come up with an assessment. We need a report card to determine how things are going at a certain lake for fish populations. So yeah, for instance, if we're seeing good numbers of adults and good numbers of young fish, it would probably fall into a lower risk category. What I'm describing is our provincial fisheries sustainability index, and the larger sustainability index has been reviewed by provincial and national scientists, and is actually being used in other jurisdictions now. I'm pretty proud to say that this is being used throughout Canada, and not just for fish, but for other species that are studied. So once we get our fish assessments, we can determine how well the population's doing. If there's not enough adults to make kids, then that population would fall into a higher risk category. So once we have that information, what kind of fishery do we want? And that's what we really need to get from the public. So we call it our recreational fishery management objectives, our RFMOs. And so for these management objectives, it's very important that they're species and water body specific, so that we're not contradicting what's going on or putting in something that will not work. But examples of some of our management objectives are sustainable harvest. So that's the default for most of our fisheries in the province. So that's typically the catch rates aren't maybe as good as at another fishery, but there's the opportunity to bring fish home. Whereas a quality or a trophy harvest objective is where we try to manage for better catch rates and larger fish. The other objective that we have is liberal harvest, and so liberal harvest, unfortunately, is I found people have misunderstood. So it's more for situations where we know there's limitation for the population. So perhaps it's the amount of oxygen in the winter, so that fish we figure aren't going to do very well. So it's more an objective to allow fish to be shared because we know that the situation isn't very sustainable. So it's more for allocating fish than maintaining sustainable populations. It's important to discuss trade-offs and limitations when we look at our objectives, and that should be part of the discussion. So selecting regulations. So each management objective has different regulation options based on status, threats, and limitations. For instance, our default sustainable harvest, well, mostly default sustainable harvest, often if it's a lake that's doesn't have a lot of threat of being overfished, it would be a size limit, like for walleye, 50 centimeters with a bag limit of 1 to 3 fish. If there's more threats, say, of overharvest, then that's when we'd look at using a tool like our tag harvest or special harvest license, which I'm sure you're familiar with. If we had a quality harvest objective, we'd probably look at a larger size limit, so we can manage for larger size fish, or we've also used the special harvest license for that as well. So back to our management cycle. If the management objective is not being met, what do we do? So we need recovery tools. So if we're not producing enough fish to keep the population going, we might look at a tool such as catch and release, or a closure. Closures have been used in more severe, in tougher situations, but we certainly have used catch and release. In some circumstances, when populations have not recovered, stocking has been looked at to reestablish the population. So Pigeon Lake would be a good example, or Lake Wabman to the west of Edmonton. We also use tools as habitat improvements. So say on a stream, if fish have trouble moving up and down, then we might look at, say, blockages on a road crossing, or perhaps fencing to keep animals out of the water body. education is also an important tool that we use. So it's very important that we work together. We manage our fisheries with a process that focuses on fishery science. We share our information as quickly as we can. Our fall surveys are up now on our website from the lakes that we visited this fall. Right now, we're looking for your input on management objectives. So I hope that you'll sign up for some of the other seminars, especially the ones for lakes that you're interested in that we're looking at input on, and discussions on trade-offs. So yeah, the public has a substantial involvement with all these steps. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I hope that you can join in on our other seminars. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen, for that presentation. So as mentioned in our introduction, we are going to move into our question and answer section of the evening for tonight. So I see lots of great questions are coming in already, which is fantastic. So as I mentioned at the beginning of our session tonight, we did request questions when you registered through Zoom, which is great to see because we got a lot of really good feedback from folks in terms of the information that they were looking to hear for tonight. So what we did was we pulled sort of the 3 most common questions that came in through that tool, and those are what we're going to answer first before we move into the live questions. So the first question that I have here is, how does Alberta manage Indigenous, such as treaty status, First Nation, and Métis fisheries?
Thanks, Janine. I'll answer that one here. Jordan Walker here. In Alberta, Indigenous peoples have rights to fish for subsistence use for themselves and their immediate families. Indigenous fishers can use nets, hook, and more recently hook and line as well, with conditions that are part of their free license that they get from us. Fishing rights are really protected by the Canadian Constitution, and they're part of Alberta government policy as well. So Indigenous fishing requires really a free license that all treaty status or registered Métis harvesters can obtain. We also publish the rules and conditions for fishing with the gill net or hook and line. Gill nets are typically managed through minimum mesh sizes and seasonal closures. Hook and line is managed with things like conservation based size limits and seasonal closures. And like everyone, and like anyone in Alberta, Indigenous fishers certainly aren't able to waste fish like anybody is really in Alberta. So it's really an important part of our fisheries management here. Indigenous fishing too is commercial fishing. It's really for the use, subsistence use of the individual and their immediate family. Allocation too is another part of this. In Alberta, conservation is the highest priority for us. Once we've met the conservation requirements to allow for the fisheries to continue on in sustainability, the second priority is the Indigenous rights, and peoples with those rights have that priority to harvest enough fish for their needs. After that, sport fishing is the third priority, and after that, it would be economic type activities as well, such as fishing events, guiding, outfitting, lodges, and such. So, yeah, that's probably a good start for this evening. Thanks, Jimmy.
Perfect. Thank you, Jordan. So we'll move on to our next question again from the pre-submitted questions that we got through Zoom. So how does Alberta's fisheries management system compare to other provinces, such as Saskatchewan, for example? I see you talking, Dave. I'll just unmute you there.
That one's to me, right?
You betcha.
Okay. Yeah, Alberta's fisheries management system is, compared to Saskatchewan, I think we have a stronger need to more intensively manage our fisheries. Just the difference in fishing pressure between Saskatchewan and Alberta is really at the heart of that situation. It's compelled Alberta to really do quite a lot of work to come up with standardized, peer-reviewed approaches to assessing the status of a fish population. And then, as Stephen described in his presentation, we have a pretty robust fisheries management system that we've developed and we communicate to our stakeholders, that consists of setting the management objectives and then setting the regulations and other management actions to achieve those objectives, monitoring to see whether we're successful or not in our management efforts towards fulfilling those expectations, and then repeating that management cycle. So we, Alberta's, we do a pretty good job of putting that information onto our website. And, when we look across the border at Saskatchewan, we see that, they don't have that, same degree of sophistication in the information that they're putting out on their website. And I think that really just reflects the greater need we've had here for decades for more intensive fisheries management to address that really, fundamentally big difference in terms of the pressure differential between there and here. We've got about 800 fish-bearing lakes in Alberta and over 300,000 anglers. And in Saskatchewan, it's, tens of thousands of lakes and, right around 200,000 licensed anglers. So it's quite a big difference. And I think what you see just in terms of our communication here and our web-based materials really kind of speaks to how Alberta's been, I think more progressive in our management approaches just by sheer necessity.
Great, thanks so much, Dave. So we'll move on to our last pre-submitted question, which I think I've seen come up a couple of times this evening already. So what is Alberta's walleye stocking plan for 2021? Stuart, you'll have to unmute yourself. Don't worry, folks, we'll get the hang of this.
My apologies. Very popular question, and it's an exciting time to be in fisheries management. As Stephen had mentioned during the presentation, there's been a couple of water bodies in central and southern Alberta where we've managed to establish walleye, Pigeon Lake, Sylvan Lake, Wildman Lake, Crawling Valley, Newell, and there's many more. All of result of stocking efforts in the past. It's an exciting time to be in fisheries management in Alberta, since for 2020 we had planned to reinvigorate the walleye stocking program. However, due to COVID, we were forced to take to sit the season out, which was an unfortunate. But understandable. It just couldn't happen in the time frame. For 2021, we want to brush off those plans and begin egg. We're looking at opportunities to take eggs from water bodies in the province and work with our hatchery staff to develop a walleye stock for the for some of our lakes and reservoirs in the province. The number of water bodies that we'll be able to stock will depend on the number of eggs that we can successfully take and hatch. All those are variables that we tried to take into account. So, and just there's a lot of natural variability. So we just want to make sure that we have lakes in the wings should we have stock available. Craig, is there anything you'd like to add?
You did a good job. I just wanted to sort of remind everybody back in the mid 80s when we first started up the walleye program, the focus back then was to sort of create or establish walleye populations in many lakes throughout Alberta. It was sort of the objectives was stock, if we could, 3 consecutive years in a row, and let Mother Nature take over from there and try to establish walleye populations in the various lakes we stocked. Minister Nixon has now directed us to look at other options now with the walleye and possibly try to create these put, grow, and take fisheries in Alberta. And so it's going to take a while to get the walleye program back up like it was back in the roaring 90s, but hopefully we'll get there.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. All right, so we're going to move into our live questions that have been submitted here. So the first one we'll respond to is, where are we at with whirling disease in our river systems?
All right, Janine, I can take that one. It's
Perfect.
Matt Besco here from Wildlife Disease and Licensing. So with respect to whirling disease, we currently have whirling disease that's been established into 4 major watersheds provincially in the Red Deer River, the Bow, the Old Man, and the North Saskatchewan. Not all tributaries in those systems currently have whirling disease, and it hasn't been detected in all those tributaries to date. What we're doing in the whirling disease program over the next couple of years is to look at a more fine-scale approach at looking at specific areas with whirling disease, what is the prevalence and the distribution of this disease on a provincial basis. And in terms of mitigating it, the primary objective for us is to mitigate the spread and to reduce mortality in our fishery stocks. So we want to increase our education and our outreach. A lot of the information and materials can be found on our website. Just Google whirling disease alberta.ca and you'll be taken right to our website. It has all the CFIA reports and a number of other pieces of information that are quite useful. We're also promoting a clean, drain, dry program and the use of decontamination stations that are set up throughout the province. We've established protocols for anyone working in and around some of these watersheds that are quite vulnerable in order to decontaminate their gear and equipment before entering them. We're inspecting all private and commercial aquaculture facilities in the province. And so our primary goal with that program in those watersheds is to prevent the spread. So that's where we're at this point in time.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt, for that summary. All right, so our next question is from Jesse. So what are we doing about the new coal mining that is happening in the Rockies? Is it going to affect our fisheries?
Okay, hi Janine. I can address that. I'm just going to flip to something here. So yeah, you know, we're certainly very aware of the concern that's been raised by Albertans with regards to the coal, the changes to the coal policy on these slopes. I think it's important to note that coal development in the province is regulated by the Alberta Energy Regulator, and the AER has a process for reviewing coal applications, and this process hasn't changed as a result of the recent changes to Alberta's coal policy. And you know, this process is subject to a suite of legislation and standards, guidelines, and regulatory requirements. And an important part of the process is that as part of under the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act, projects like coal mines require an environmental impact assessment. And it's a comprehensive assessment of the effects of a project on biological systems and things like water and other aspects of Alberta's ecology. In this case, the focus would be on aquatic ecology and inclusive of the effects on fisheries. So during that process, provincial fisheries biologists can be involved to provide advice and recommendations as to the activity itself, the assessment of the effects on aquatic systems, and ways to mitigate those effects. And it's important to note that as biologists in that process, we're advisors, we're not decision makers. And for a major project like a coal mine, under by agreement with the federal government, they are also involved in an environmental impact assessment process. So the federal government does get involved in matters such as that. Hope that answers the question. Anyways, as I say, we are fisheries biologists are very tuned into topics like this and involved in providing advice to making decisions on activities like that.
Great, thanks so much, Dave. Yeah, I know that's a topic that's at the top of everybody's minds right now, so appreciate that. All right, so our next question is from Matt. So how has the increased pressures from Albertans staying near home waters affected our various populations? Are the current management strategies able to cope with these new pressures?
Hi, Janine. I can answer that one. Thanks very much for the question. It's been an interesting summer as part of the walleye stocking program that Stuart alluded to, and the part of the monitoring that Stephen alluded to too. We were out this past summer at several fisheries monitoring angling effort, and we were actually pleasantly surprised that effort was up quite substantially, and it's also reflected in license sales. So people did stay home. People did fish more. I think people spent a lot more time outdoors recreating. Yes, the current management strategies are able to cope with these new pressures. Alberta's fisheries management system is very robust. We'll continue monitoring the effort associated with COVID and that effort on fish populations. And with the system we have and our ability to assess populations quickly and determine status and change the statuses, we can adjust quite quickly. So yes, the strategies will be able to cope. Thanks for the question.
Great, thanks, Bill. All right, so our next question is from Matthew. So from June 15th to October 31st, you can keep cutthroat and rainbow trout over 35 centimeters on the Sheep River. The fish on this river have been small in the last number of years that I have fished it. I worry that allowing to keep fish over 35 centimeters is not allowing them to spawn or grow to keep the river stocked to its potential. Has AEP thought about not allowing sustainable harvest for the river?
Hi, Janine. This is Miles. I can take a part of this question. So first off, thank you, Matthew, for the question. So, where I'm located, the Sheep River isn't within my management area. And so it's a good opportunity just to mention that there are several other webinars that are going to take place, some this week, one focusing on native trout recovery. And I suspect Matthew and folks that are interested in those questions, you'll really appreciate the content in that webinar. Additionally, there'll be a Southern Alberta regional webinar next week where biologists managing in that part of the world will be around and able to answer more water body specific questions. But with respect to the portion of the question that talks about the RFMO, the Recreational Fisheries Management Objective of Sustainable Harvest, I would say the answer is certainly yes. So biologists, as Stephen had shown in his presentation there with our fisheries management system, our cycle, will perform assessments, will determine abundance, catch rates, size structures of fish populations. We look at that information and say, okay, within a sort of our report card of sustainability, where do those sit? And if we're noticing changes in that data in abundance, in shrinking of size classes, as you've indicated you've seen in your recreational fishery, that's where we would look at the existing RFMO and say, does this make sense? Are we meeting this objective? And then within our fisheries management cycle, we would look at it and go, oh, maybe we need a recovery action here, or potentially a different maintenance action, and that could be shifting to a different recreational management objective. And those would be the things that actually come to these processes where we would be delivering a survey online and saying, yeah, we're interested in your feedback so that we can assess those types of changes, or if necessary, provide input back and say, you're right, our data agrees with what you're observing in the recreational fishery. We do see changes here and need to take actions to recover those fish. So the system is set up to actually evaluate questions just like that, Matthew.
Great, thank you, Miles. All right, so our next question is from Renee. So why do you still allow barbed hooks?
Good question. We're getting asked that more and more. Interestingly, we had a barbless, we have the ability to regulate barbed and barbless hooks quite a number of years ago. And we had some regulations in place to that effect. And a few years ago now, the federal government did a regulation amendment and unintentionally removed the ability for Alberta to regulate restrict the use of barbed hooks in our waters. So we learned about that afterwards, after that change was made. And at that time, we decided to let the matter rest for a period of time and see how Albertans reacted to it. We made it, rather than a regulation, our guidance to Albertans was to make the choice to use barbed or barbless hooks as a matter of their own personal ethics, based on the indication that the science wasn't really solid on whether barbless hooks made a big difference in terms of reducing fishing-caused mortality. It's been that way since, and more recently, we've been hearing a lot more interest from the angling community with regards to the use of barbless hooks. So we have signaled to the federal government that we want to pursue a regulation amendment again of that federal regulation to give Alberta the ability to restrict the use of barbed hooks again. So we'll be pursuing that. It's a federal regulation, so the timeline isn't 100% up to us. The federal government is willing to work with us. However, we can't say when that regulation amendment is going to be completed. So we're going to continue to advise anglers to make a decision with regards to the use of barbed or barbless hooks that aligns with their ethics and their assessment of how well they're able to handle fish to reduce mortality. And really, one of the key factors for fishing caused mortality is handling time of air exposure for the fish. So, if you use barbless hooks, because especially you believe that it minimizes visible damage to the fish and reduces air exposure time for you, then, please feel free to do so. And in the meantime, we'll be pursuing a regulation amendment. When we have that ability again, we'll be consulting with the angling community again to find out, get some more feedback on where to apply those restrictions. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you, Dave. So our next question that we'll go to is from Ace or Anthony. So the current walleye size restrictions do not seem to make any sense. The larger fish are typically the females, and the larger the fish, the more eggs. It then makes sense to release the larger fish and keep the ones that make a meal. In addition to collapsed fisheries, the regulations also promote poaching. Why are slot limits not utilized in Alberta?
Hi, Janine. I'll answer that. Stephen Spencer here. There's several there. Thanks for the question, Anthony. Several things to be addressed there. First of all, the easy one, we are currently evaluating slots in Alberta, and I would encourage you to attend the seminar that's coming up, I think, in the next day or two on the slot assessment that we're doing, which is ongoing. Your question about why do we kill the big ones, and you said the big fish have more eggs, and you're absolutely right. They do have more eggs, but it's a regulation that allows the young fish to survive to get old enough to spawn a couple of times, and so we found that that's enough to keep the populations going. The thing is, to keep a fish alive for a long time to become large is risky if there's enough fishing. So I was once talking to a cattle producer, and I said, we can't kill all the calves, because after a while there'd be no cows left. So that's what we call a maximum size limit that would allow you to kill the small fish, but not the large ones. But eventually we need those small fish to become larger fish. So the current minimum size regulations for walleye and northern pike that you see on a lot of our fisheries, 63 for pike and 50 for centimeters for walleye, are designed to allow 2 to 5 years for the small females to spawn, to produce enough young to replace themselves. Good questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. So just a note, so I see Alan's question here about you can manage the fisheries all you want, but how are you planning on enforcing the regulations with the lack of enforcement staff? So we'll let our colleagues over in the Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Branch respond to this question. And Alan, we will post your question on the Ask the Expert tool, so you can look for that in future days here to come. So the next question that we'll answer live is from Eric H. So why isn't Alberta employing a classified water system on high traffic rivers and streams to boost license revenues and manage fishing pressure? Sorry.
Thanks, Janine. I can answer that one. So it's Matt again. So it's a very good question because it speaks to two particular issues. One is boosting license revenues, and the second is to actually reduce pressure. So there's all sorts of ways that we can look at in terms of increasing licensing revenues, from looking at individual license sales, promoting licenses throughout Alberta in terms of uptake among Alberta residents, or increasing fees and costs for non-residents that come to Alberta. Part of the revenue system is we get a lot of interest from stakeholders that don't mind paying more for licenses as long as those license revenues return to the direct management of the resource. So that's one particular question. And through these engagement sessions and following these engagement sessions, we'll be looking for a variety of suggestions with respect to the increase of revenues. The second question, which I think is quite relevant in this situation, is the use of classification of our waters for several reasons, one of which is to reduce angling pressure. And you can do that very much in a similar way that BC would actually do it, for increased revenue costs and reservation system for non-residents in order to be able to fish these waters. When we look to our friends in other jurisdictions such as Montana, they actually have a reservation system on a daily basis for non-residents, even for residents as well, to angle in these waters. So these are some of the suggestions that we would entertain over the next week or so. Whether or not it's a classification system, or utilizing the draw system, or utilizing other means by which we could classify waters, is the question that we want to be able to get answered. The second part, the last part of this, is what sort of recreational experience do people want? So there's the sustainability and the pressure on the fishery stocks, and then there's the type of recreational experience that users would like in terms of crowding. So I think these are good questions. The classified waters suggestion is one means by which we can satisfy some of those concerns, but there are others, and we'd hope to spend the next week to be able to listen to your ideas on that. It's a very good question.
Great. Thank you, Matt. So the next question that we'll go to is from Stan. So how do you manage fisheries where the water bodies are under continual threat of degradation by grazing and irresponsible OHV users? Multiple eastern slope streams that are home to endangered West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout run through grazing leases. What happened to the Cows and Fish program?
Thank you, Stan, for that answer, or for that question. It's an interesting one. It's got a couple of prongs. One of the things you might want to look into is we have the Native Trout Program update on the January 21st seminar. So I encourage you to be part of that or to join that session and be part of it. In it, you'll see some examples in the province where we have reclamation, as well as some of how native trout are being taken into consider in some of those high recreation use areas of the province. You mentioned something in your question. You mentioned about where's the Cows and Fish program. The Cows and Fish program has been around for almost 3 decades now, and it's still alive and well supported by fisheries management in the province. It's been responsible for many activities that provide tools to producers that allow fish and cows to coexist well together. Just recently, I just read on their social media site that they just expanded their offices into Rocky Mountain House. So it's exciting times for incorporating some of the recreation use as well as some of the commercial use, such as our ranchers, into the and how they work well with fish, or how they can live together on the same landscape. So I encourage you to take advantage of the session and learn more about the native trout program in Alberta. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stuart. So our next question is from Darcy. So how can we help fisheries control poaching on lakes?
Hi there. I can do that one, Janine. This is Bill Patterson. The best way we can control poaching on lakes is to use Alberta's Report a Poacher line. It's as simple as that. The number is easy to remember. It's 1-800-642-3800. It's a 24/7 line, and you can call it. You can remain anonymous if you like. The officers at the other end of the line will take down all the information and quickly tend to any call. Thanks very much.
I just want to add that was a good answer, Bill. And
thanks.
We do calculate the amount of poaching. Like, poaching's been around forever. It will be around forever. And our officers have some clever tools for catching the poachers, but we do consider that with our calculations. And as Bill said, please call the RAP line.
Great, thanks, Stephen, for adding that in. So our next question is just about our stocking programs from Michael. So what is limiting increasing stocking programs? Is it just funding, or are there supply restrictions and challenges? And what would it take to increase stocking to keep up with the fishing pressure?
Okay, well, I'll tackle that. The province owns four fish hatcheries. 2 are brood stations, 2 are production hatcheries, as we call it. We raise about 115,000 kilos of trout every year. In terms of, are we at our full complement? Pretty much we are. The hatcheries are pretty much 100% full. Right now, the government has done a great job in funding the hatcheries. We've never seen funding like this. We're going to have a brand new hatchery getting built starting this summer at Raven at Caroline. And that'll allow us to increase our trout production, but also allow us to dabble into, if the biologists want a West Slope cutthroat trout or grayling or whatever, bull trout, whatever program they see the future going into. So the Raven will be the first brand new fish hatchery the province built since 1986. So it's really exciting. Funding, we're in a good shape. Funding wise, we're probably leading. Next to British Columbia, we're probably one of the top provincial agencies that funds fish stocking in Alberta. In terms of other options, as we mentioned earlier today, the Walleye program, it's going to be exciting to reestablish that program. It's been many years since we started it up. And so we'll go from there. You can always ask for another fish hatchery, but of course the minister is it's tough to compete for, value dollars within government. But right now, we're pretty much at full. We've done a modernization at the Allison Creek hatchery that's almost complete. Sam Livingston Fish Hatchery, that is up and operating. We've got a few bugs to work out of. And then the Coal Lake Fish Hatchery is going to go from a flow-through hatchery to a reuse hatchery. So what that allows us to do is capture our heating costs. We'll be able to drive down our cost per fish that we raise out of the Coal Lake hatchery and raise our fish quicker with the warmer water. So actually pretty exciting times for the fish hatcheries. And we can always look at the private aquaculture industry to ask for their assistance in helping us with the trout stocking if we want to expand it.
Perfect. Thank you, Craig. All right, so our next question is from Greg. So is consideration being given to a code of practice for habitat restoration projects? Having a suite of standards and guidelines for this kind of activity would potentially allow this work to be expedited and avoid formal reviews under the Water Act.
Thanks, Janine. Thanks, Greg. I'll answer this one, Jordan, here. You know, it's a really great question. And this is, you know, in Alberta right now, we are working to reduce red tape, reduce the administration of a number of these types of activities. And fisheries managers are contributing to that and biologists are contributing to that. Part of it is through the best management practices that we can provide into that system, and they're currently working on those, to improve the way which we are able to manage through some of those things. Specifically in terms of restoration projects, it's a really good question. I'm going to take it back, with it's a good idea here, and see about how we can move some of that forward. I appreciate that question.
Great, thanks, Jordan. So our next question is from Blaine. What is the per capita of people with fishing licenses per lake in Alberta?
Hi, Janine. It's David Park. I can answer that. Thanks, Blaine. Based on this year's sales of sport fishing licenses, in terms of numbers of anglers per lake, if that's what you're asking, the number is roughly 400 licensed anglers per lake. And there, you could add to that some number of unlicensed seniors and youth anglers as well. So, of course, that's spread out across all the lakes that vary considerably in size, but just on a anglers per lake basis, that's the number.
Great, thanks, Dave. So our next question is from Sterling. So why are we only stocking walleye in the majority of the lakes? Can we not stock yellow perch or other species that have been decimated due to the stocking of walleye?
Okay, I can handle that, Janine. Stephen here. I just wanted to, why are we only stocking walleye in the majority of the lakes? Actually, there's a few lakes that we're going to try walleye stocking in. It has been used recently at Lake Wallman to restore that population, and also in Lac La Biche. But the walleye stocking program that Craig Copeland from the hatchery spoke about just a little while ago, what is the put, take, and grow walleye stocking. So that won't be in the majority of our lakes. It'll be in a select water bodies over the province, and it'll be done in the next well. And the thing that with walleye is that it takes a while to grow a large walleye. So at the hatchery, they're able to grow a very nice sized trout by the spring, and within a week you're able to catch it. But walleye start out very tiny, and it'll take 4 to 5 years for some of these walleye to get large enough for us to catch them. So I kind of like to temper expectations with reality here, because we certainly are excited about that program and evaluating it, but takes a while to grow a good walleye, and our stockings in the past have not always been successful. So that's the other thing we're looking at. Will they be successful moving forward here? The other question about yellow perch, why not stock yellow perch? So because they've been decimated due to stocking of walleye. So the yellow perch in large lakes, looking across a whole bunch of lakes, in my experience, they don't do well at the same time. So as we restored the large predators in these lakes, perch tend to assume a different role in the ecosystem. They become more of a nearshore fish, and they don't tend to live very long, and are more a forage fish. Whereas in lakes where we don't have lots of pike and walleye, that's where we see our best perch fishing. So it's it seems to be one or the other. The perch seem to be pretty flexible about their life history, and they can exist at in a different part of the lake and don't tend to get big. They remain small, but they're still there.
Great, thank you, Stephen. All right, so our next question we'll go through is from Greg. So does the AEP plan on developing any habitat-based fisheries management objectives?
Hi, Janine, I can take that one. This is Miles. Thank you for the question, Greg. So in our existing recreational fish management objectives, the front portion of those documents, the frameworks for walleye and pike, we actually spent some time talking about Alberta's fisheries management objective system. So a comprehensive fisheries management objective we view as having 4 critical parts: a recreational fish management objective, Indigenous fish management objective, a habitat objective, and an ecosystem objective. So, as we were evolving and growing sort of our fisheries management system starting a couple of years ago, we prioritized developing recreational fisheries management objectives, while at the same time working on Indigenous fish management objectives and habitat management objectives. So as well as we've been kind of working on the format, content, and structure on how those would look, whether it's a document or if they would live maybe more aptly in some sort of different format. We've also seen changes by some of our peers in the Lands Division and other regulatory bodies that have seen growth in our watercourse crossing inspection programs and other areas that have tie over to fish habitat objectives. So stand by, they are being developed. We've focused, on a lot of the allocation pieces of recreational and Indigenous, but we would expect that we would develop habitat management objectives here in time.
Great, thank you, Miles. So the next question that we'll go to is from Tony. So commercial netting, are commercial permits using nets being issued in Fish Management Zone PP1?
Thank you for the question, Tony. Since about 2014, there was an assessment done of commercial fisheries in Alberta, and that brought an end to the commercial fishing in Alberta. So there hasn't been any commercial fishing in Alberta's waters anywhere in the province since 2014. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you for that. All right, let's just have a look here. So Jesse, for your question about how is the native trout populations in the McLeod River system. So again, I'd encourage you to come and join us on Thursday evening for the native trout webinar. And if you can't join us for that, then look for the recording, because that's where we'll really be diving into the specifics of native trout populations as we go forward here. And I see we have another question here. So from Ken, what are the mechanics for the public being involved in setting fisheries management objectives for a water body?
Okay, I can speak to that for sure. And yeah, thanks. It's a really good question. So, using an example like walleye, one thing that we've recognized based on our understanding of what Albertans want to experience in their walleye fisheries, we would apply in that case sort of a default fisheries management objective, and that would be based on our understanding of what would apply to the majority of the fisheries. So in the case of walleye, it's sustainable harvest. And from there, we would have conversations with the angling community, either in online forums like this, in person, and through online surveys, to identify those situations where we want to deviate from that sort of standard sustainable harvest type of fishery, and select potentially water bodies that have high quality fisheries objectives, potentially even very high quality old growth, trophy, I guess, fishing experiences. But when we do that. We use survey tools and engagement sessions such as these and face-to-face engagements, as well as interacting with stakeholder organizations to get feedback on what those other management objective categories can be and where to apply them.
Great, thank you, Dave. So just a question from Hal here. So where can you find the results of the lakes tested this year?
Hi, Janine. I can answer that one for Hal. The simplest way to find the results from the lakes that we've fall index netted this year, Hal, is to get onto a Google search and search, put this in your search window, Alberta Fin 2020. And maybe add the word summaries to that search also, and that will take you directly to the summary page or where the documents are stored, and you should be able to open up one of 29 summaries that we completed this year. Thank you for the question.
Great, thanks, Bill. And we do also have the Fisheries Index Nettings, or FIN, survey results also linked on the engagement webpage. So if you go to the engagement webpage, likely where you went to register for this webinar, you'll find a link for those in the resource section. So if Google isn't working for you and you can't quite find it, then don't worry, you can find it on the engagement page there as well.
Thanks, Janine.
Perfect, thanks. All right, so next up here, we'll go to a question from Andrew. So what is the plan to expand the management index to include some other species, such as lake whitefish, perch, or burbot?
I can take that one, Janine.
Perfect.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question, Andrew. Currently, we use standard index netting largely for northern pike and for walleye, but also for the community of fish that include some of the species that you mentioned in your question. We are looking to refine, those techniques though, to improve those. And although we don't have, a plan for this lake whitefish or perch in this year, we're certainly working towards doing those and to have those indexes correlated to abundance. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Great, thanks, Jordan. All right, so our next question is, why do we not supply bait fish as food stocks to improve fish growth and quality?
Hi, Janine, I'll answer that. Yeah, interesting question. I was out fishing this summer, and I was thinking that I was feeding the fish more than I was catching the fish. But in all seriousness, Alberta lakes tend to be quite productive, so we have an abundance of food out there. And the rare occasion where I've seen not enough bait fish is when we've had rapid changes in the fish populations, like say at Lac Sainte Anne in the early 2000s, as the walleye came back in big numbers. You couldn't buy a perch or a spot-tail shiner. Like they would just seem to be decimated. And it was pretty concerning. The fish got skinny for a little while, but there's a balance in nature, and the walleye got skinny for a while. Some of them died. Some of the bigger ones died, and which was unfortunate, of course. But the middle community recovered, and very quickly the fishery was back to what it was. So, and with much higher numbers of fish. So the same thing happened at other lakes like Pigeon and more recently at Wabman. So there's lots of food in these lakes, and it's just a matter of the balance that occurs very naturally between the predatory fish and the bait fish. Thanks for the question.
Great, thanks, Stephen. So next question we'll go to here is from Nathan. So the map you showed was mostly yellow and red with very little green on it. Obviously, we are not in good shape. Do you have a plan and the support needed to turn that map green?
Okay, hi Nathan. So the map you're referring to, if I recall correctly, that was a map showing the distribution of walleye populations by sustainability category. So I apologize if I'm remembering that incorrectly, but I can speak to that anyways. So, you know, just to be clear, that orange category that you see on that map, or that yellow category, that's fisheries at moderate risk. And, you know, many fisheries, if they're being fished by us, and if they have pretty good access and some, you know, maybe some campgrounds and some cottage development around them, that's a pretty common risk category for them to be in. You know, they're not remote lakes, they're not fly-in lakes with very little access and very lightly touched fish populations, but nor are they really high risk fisheries that are under high, you know, very high pressure. Maybe you're suffering from some habitat degradation issues. They're naturally sustaining. They're able to more or less keep up with the use that they're facing. So would we like to improve them? In a lot of cases, perhaps. In some cases, keeping them in that moderate risk category is actually a fairly comfortable place for us to be. It's a place where we can provide some harvest opportunity without trading off much in the way of providing anglers with the opportunity to fish the lake. So, you know, that I spoke earlier to recreational fisheries management objective, kind of a standard category being sustainable harvest. And it's in that kind of yellow category, that moderate risk state, where we're able to provide that. And if we wanted to go to, say, a lower risk, a green state, we might have to put in more restrictive regulations or take some other management action to get that fish population to that next kind of level up in terms of abundance and size structure, and give us more old fish, for example. Hope that explains it.
And Dave, I'd just like to add on to that, because you were kind of hitting on it there, and we've spent some time today talking about different objectives. So something that I think is really important to reinforce there is, as Dave was saying, whether it's walleye, or those maps are also available for other species like northern pike and bull trout, Arctic grayling, and they're on our website at alberta.ca in the Fish Sustainability Index. You can go by species and look at what maps are present. They'll give you an idea of what the current adult abundance or immature abundance is. And so, yeah, as we think about those regulations on a water body, so whether that's a slot limit or whether it's a minimum size limit and how large that is, we've heard from Albertans in previous engagements that people desire a range of fisheries on the landscape that move from things like really maximizing harvest opportunity, that it's really important to take fish home or have a shore lunch, to the other end of the spectrum where anglers would really value seeing a trophy experience where they're comfortable with very minimal or no harvest, but will have those old fish, high numbers of fish. And in those cases, that's where we would drive towards with public support, the idea of having a lower risk and higher abundance fishery. So when you think about those maps, particularly for walleye and pike, they should be a mosaic of yellow and orange and red and green. Some water bodies, and Stephen talked about this previously, that would have an objective of liberal harvest, are fisheries that are naturally limited. It might be because of low oxygen levels or extreme land use around them, or changes in water levels through time. And so as managers, we would assess those lakes and say it's not reasonable or feasible for them to actually achieve a moderate risk or low risk status because of some confounding factor. So that comes in and to the situation as well, and all plays back into that system of what potential objectives are present, can be met, and then we can provide those through engagement sessions and the online surveys that we have to anglers to hear back and say, oh, well, you know, at Lake X, we could have everything from sustainable harvest at a yellow, a moderate abundance, to trophy. And the trade-off, as Stephen said, talking about those trade-offs is really important. That trade-off then becomes, we'll likely see a decline in harvest opportunity, but an increase in abundance and size. And if the effort at a lake is really low, if it's a more remote fishery or it's further away from large centers, you could still have large fish and a sustainable harvest objective. we just wouldn't expect that to be the case. So yeah, the desired intent is not to see that map all green. It's to see that map with a mosaic, but as Dave indicated, sort of our default objective is sustainable harvest. Our desired abundance to meet that is in that yellow, maybe touching the orange range. And then as we have other fisheries on the landscape, through these management actions and regulations, we would seek to have some greens and then also recognize, yep, there will be some reds and oranges out there. And so we ensure that the objective on those aligns with what they're capable of providing.
Great, thanks Miles for that extra information there. That was great. All right, so Don, I see your question here about when is Alberta going to get serious about illegal fish stocking? So again, this is a question that we will direct over towards our folks in the Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Branch. And I'd also direct you to our Don't Let It Loose campaign, which is one of our main education campaigns that we run in the department around things like releasing goldfish particularly has been a large target of that campaign to focus on ensuring that people know that we shouldn't be moving fish from one water body to another or releasing them. So again, we'll follow up with this in more detail on the Ask the Expert tool that we have online. So next we'll go to William's question. So catch and release is practiced widely and proven effective. That said, some waters get so much pressure that fish caught by the end of a summer on popular cutthroat streams are scarred, jaws are deformed, flies still embedded. Any suggestions to reduce pressure yet still offer fishing opportunities? Stuart, you're muted there if you're answering.
That's twice.
There we go.
Thank you,
like,
William.
man, nobody wants this question.
Thank you, William. 2020 was a record high participation rates. We are hearing from our anglers access points that were usually not too busy were lined up with vehicles. So our streams and lakes and streams we're busy, and we're hearing more of these types of situations out there. I think one of the most important things you can do is talk to the local fisheries biologist, let them know that that's what you're seeing. That feedback is really important to us. Because it allows us to use other tools in our toolbox to allow fishing. Some of it may be seasonal closures, and there's other jurisdictional uses such as class water bodies. I know that Matt had spoke to during an earlier question, but those are the types of things that we can look at to start reducing some of the impact of angling on overutilized fisheries. Again, we wouldn't make that decision lightly. We would, again, based on feedback we're hearing from our anglers, we would reach out to the angler community and get those ideas and see where we can go from there. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you, Stuart. So next question we'll go to, what are our plans to keep the carp from spreading in our rivers and killing our native fish?
That, Janine. So that's an excellent question and quite relevant. And Alberta has been involved in a lot of education and outreach initiatives, and Janine mentioned that a little bit earlier with respect to the Don't Let It Loose program. And I think the education and the outreach component are the most important elements of this, and it's and we're going to be looking at ways over the next year to increase that messaging and make sure that we don't get any non-natives that are introduced in these watersheds. That's likely the most cost-effective means by which we can manage this program, because once these fish are set up and present in many of these watersheds, then the options around them are limited and quite expensive. If we want to use toxicants, then there's a number of issues around the use of that, including the mortality around some of our other fish or desirable fish species in those waters. There's also selective trapping, which is incredibly time consuming and expensive. So, and there's also the enforcement end, and the enforcement folks will probably speak to that as well. But the primary means by which we can influence this practice is to engage with the public, making sure that we're not releasing these fish into our waters, and outline many of the negative consequences that occur as a result of that. Good question. Thanks, Janine. Great.
Thank you, Matt. All right, so our next question here. Without clean lakes, the fish management conversation is somewhat muted. What is the province doing about the cleanliness of our lakes, and is fisheries part of this conversation?
I can take that one, Janine. Really good question, Darren. I mean, it really speaks to an important part of fisheries management, which is the habitat. And you asked specifically around lakes. Fisheries managers certainly have an interest and are part of that conversation for sure. Around water bodies, there are a lot of different groups that have responsibilities around the waters, municipalities, individual landowners, farmers, all sorts of folks do. And fisheries managers interact with all of them in a lot of ways. The watershed protection and advisory committees are set up around the province for most watersheds. And it's also a place where fisheries biologists will participate, spend, and act as resource experts for a lot of that as well. Certainly through the processes that we have for approvals for changes around watersheds, fisheries managers also have the opportunity and put in their recommendations and their expertise to put conditions and ensure that the fish habitat around the water bodies are protected. So it's really a collective of everybody's efforts for sure. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Jordan. All right, so our next question here is from Kelly. So why can fishing guides from other provinces guide in Alberta with only a non-resident sport fishing license and no additional licenses or training? Are there plans to change this as fishing pressure on our eastern slopes continues to rise?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Kelly. David Park again. I'm happy to advise that just recently Alberta made a regulatory amendment to create a angling guiding license category. And there's no terms or conditions established for this license yet. We are going to be engaging with the angling guide community to get their feedback on what a guiding license should be in terms of things like eligibility criteria and other terms and conditions. And this move is in response to the recognition that Alberta, as you correctly indicate, did not have any means to license fishing guides in this province. And our approach over some time was to monitor the situation and see for feedback signals from the angling community as to when it would be the right time to basically add red tape. And we don't like to do that unless it's necessary, but in this case we felt that it was important based on the feedback we were getting and our assessment of the significance of the angling guiding presence on some of our especially some of our flowing waters down south. So I guess based on your question, the reason you're asking it, I'm hoping that that's good news to you, that we're going down that path, and we are going to be working with the guiding community and building the meat on those on the bones that we've created by virtue of that licensing or that regulatory amendment. Good question. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Dave. All right. So our next question is from Renee. So have there ever been discussions of implementing an online exam to access a fishing license? It would be a great educational opportunity.
I'll check to see my mute is off. Thank you, Renee, for the question. Because Alberta has such a diversity of trout species, Alberta puts a strong emphasis on educating anglers on what species live in the province. And as you notice in the Alberta Fishing Reg, there's a 2-page layout just going through what species look like and the differentiations between each species. Also, we've been working with the Alberta Hunter Education Instructors Association to create a course that's online for fish education. Now, we haven't tied it to a license in any way, but during COVID, just as COVID hit us, the HIA launched the fish education program, and I believe they saw tens of thousands in uptake for that fish education program. So what we've learned from it, there's an appetite for the information being out there and being available, and we thank our partner for working with us to develop such a useful tool. So I hope that helps.
Great, thanks, Stuart. All right, so next up we'll go to a question from Lindsay here. Is there a plan to add mandatory harvest declaring for fish, similar to big game or game bird licenses to help manage fisheries?
I can do that. Thanks for the question, Lindsay. Is there a plan? No, there's not a plan, but we do have the ability to collect that information. Just like hunting, that information can be collected through the Alberta Realm app, the thing you download onto your phone and buy licenses through, or through the Realm website, where you log on and buy your licenses. So our current program is very successful in collecting data we currently need to manage fisheries. However, if new questions arise, or maybe we're challenged by some novel allocation questions, we may consider developing a plan to have harvest reported through those apps and website. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Bill. All right, so our next question here is from Dave. So introduced species rarely work out well, yet we continue to do this in our Alberta lakes. I have noticed a significant reduction of avian and aquatic species since walleye were introduced to Wabamun. How do you justify this?
I'll answer that. Thanks, Janine. Hi, Dave. I've noticed the same thing at Wabamun. So just to back up a bit, and I kind of touched on this earlier when someone had asked about why don't we stock forage fish into lakes or bait for fish to eat. So Wabamun used to have walleye in it over 100 years ago. The records indicated that's when they were fished out. So this was a reintroduction of walleye to that lake. And when we consulted on it with the public, and there was articles in the newspaper, etc., we did talk about that there would probably be some adjustment for the communities at the lake. And so I agree with you. 10 years ago, there was a lot of small fishes in the near shore. Like you'd walk around the shore and it would just, things would be moving, and we'll see that come back. It'll take a little bit of time, but as the walleye numbers built up, they've eaten a lot of the forage fish, and that's what the birds need. And the birds have moved on to other areas, but they'll be back as well. We've seen this before. It's a momentary. It'll take 2 to 3 years, and we'll see some sort of recovery. But I just want to make a pitch that we are looking for input on changes at Wabamun Lake. So if you go to our questionnaire, I'd appreciate your opinions on what you'd like to see going forward at Wabamun Lake. So thanks for the question.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stephen. All right, so we will move on to our last question of the evening tonight from Russ. So why are installed aerators not being used on some stocked ponds and lakes during the winter months?
Thanks, Janine. Maybe I'll jump in. I haven't had an opportunity to answer anything yet. So another good question. actually a lot of the aeration facilities that folks would see out there as they're doing their winter activities are actually run by agencies outside of Alberta Environment Parks. Typically, Alberta Conservation Association is an agency that we work with closely that does a lot of the aeration in the province, as well as some municipalities that will actually take on that role as well. Typically, what we try to do with those aeration systems is provided on water bodies where they're typically not deep enough. They actually can't make it through the winter on their own without depleting oxygen levels under that lake. So there is a bit of a system where we pick those lakes from an aspect to say we try to go with some of the ones that have the highest effort, where we're going to see a lot of anglers out there on, as well as the ones that are at the most risk to not making it through the winter from oxygen levels. So chances are, if you see an aeration or see a pond or fishing on a pond that doesn't have an aeration system, it could mean one of a couple things, that it typically does have oxygen to make it through the winter, or it also might be remote, and the trade-off is it can be very expensive to run aeration systems, et cetera, and there's always not an easy means to find things like utilities from those aspects. So we are always looking, I think, when we're talking with our partners about new opportunities for either aeration or stocking opportunities, and we'd love to hear more of those opportunities going forward.
Great. Thanks so much, Kaden. Chiming in for the last question. That's perfect. All right, folks. So with that, I'd really like to thank you for your time this evening, for joining us. We're so excited to see so many people were interested and open to this new online format. So just to bring us to a close here, again, we'd like to redirect you to the survey. So it is open until February 8th at 9 a.m. So please go ahead and fill that out. We are looking for your feedback there. In addition, when this webinar is closed tonight, you will actually be sent to a quick survey just about your experience tonight. So we know this is the first time that we've run online sessions like this, of course, due to COVID and everything else that's going on, but we would like to hear your feedback on the actual session tonight as well. So in terms of other opportunities that we have to learn, so of course tonight was just the first night in a series of webinars. So we've got them running Tuesday through Thursday this week, and then Monday through Wednesday next week. We'd also invite you to have a good look on our engagement page, because we do have fact sheets posted for each of the proposed regulation changes. So if you have questions about the specific water body changes that are being proposed, please go and have a look at those fact sheets, because there's lots of really great information in there. And then, as previously mentioned, we also have our AXI Expert tool that we have on there, as well as a map that showcases all of the water bodies that we are proposing for changes this evening, or in this regulation package change. So additionally, I would also invite you to like us on Facebook. So we've been doing lots of work on our My Wild Alberta account to inform people about the changes that are happening throughout the department, and a lot of the really great work that our fisheries biologists get up to. So it gives you kind of that insider look that you can hear some really cool stories on. So I'd invite you to check that out. And then, of course, we have our family fishing weekend coming up in February here. So hoping to get people out for that, recognizing that all sport fishing regulations still apply, but you can fish without a license. So with that, that brings our evening to a close. And once again, we'd like to thank you for spending your evening with us and learning a little bit more about our introduction to fisheries management. And we hope to see you again sometime this week. So thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.